and then kind of move on. Am I still? I am off mute. Perfect. But yesterday, in the infamous sugya of Takva coin, one of the back and forths, right? There was a certain raya that had the Kohen grab the animal. He wouldn't have. We still would have said Amot Mechaver Labrai. We would have given it back to the Yisrael. That was kind of one of the back and forths, and Rava basically said that again, don't make any sort of proofs from the concept of a bukhar because the bukhar has a certain kedusha that's haba me'ala, and the raya was from a certain case where you had a Yisrael who had a suffix animal. And again, that was kind of what we were talking about yesterday. We said, how could you ever say that if this really belonged to the Kohen or suffix belonged to the Kohen? How could he ever use it as meiser? That was all yesterday. But 3 lines from the top, we're just going to kind of ask some questions to really understand what that case was. So, Amar later of Acham Adifti Lavina. My spekos, what even is that case? You had some sort of suffix animal that's now in the deer, meiser behema. What are we talking about? So, Ilayim, a suffix bechoros. Are you telling me that this animal is a suffix bechor? That can't be, because we're dealing with Meister Behema, and the pasuk by Meister Behema says Yiyah Kadesh. If you Yiyah Kodesh, sorry, if you look at the pasuk, if you have it on the side of the Gemara, so it's V'chol Meister Bakar V'tzon Kol Yavar Tachas Shevet, right? Hasiri Yiyah Kodesh Hashem. So the animal that kind of goes under the 10th animal, that's the one that's going to have the kedusha. But Yiyah Kadosh Rachmana V'lo Shekvar Kadosh. But we know that when it comes to a kedusha of a bachar, it was born with the inherent kedusha. So that can't be what we're talking about. Ella Safek Pidyon Petar Chamar. What the case is talking about is you have a suffix Pidyon Petar Chamar. So you had a Chamar, and you have to do, you have to do the Pidyon Petar Chamar, the saddle, whatever it is, right? And now for some reason you have a suffix, whatever that is, and that's the animal that now jumped back into this deer. Rav Nachman, Rav Nachman, Rabba, Bar Avua, Yisrael, Sheyesh Asara, suffix Pitre Chamar, so basis. So this is pretty goofy case. But you've got a Yisrael, and he's got 10 different donkeys that all are stakos of these Bachars, and now you got a problem because you can't do much with these Hamars until you figure out you got to do the Pezar Hamar. So Mafresh Aleim Asara thin. So you got to be Mafresh an animal for each one of these Bachars, one of these lambs for each one of these Bachars. Umaisran, now you've got 10 lambs. So you do a meiser, vein shalom, because they were all stakos, you don't give them to the Kohen, or at least you don't have to give them to the Kohen. So most mechaber lavaraya, but the point is, you can do whatever you want with these animals because they're stakos. But again, all we were trying to do is figure out. We had this brisa yesterday that was relevant to the sugya that we were talking about yesterday. What is the case? And the suffix is where you had a suffix pidyon petar chamar. So not a suffix bachar, but a suffix sad that might have this kedusha, might not. Okay. Bottom line. Again, going back to one of the questions we had yesterday, the Gemara says, "My havi Allah de Mesusa." So, what brought us into this whole sugya of Takva coin was we had a bathhouse. We had 2 people fighting over a bathhouse. Nobody knew whose it was. And one guy was mocked at the bathhouse. He said, all the rabbis of the town, none of them went to the bathhouse. They were all nervous about it. And that's what kind of ushered in this whole sugya. So the Gemara says, bottom line, what happened in that bathhouse? Well, what was the answer? Was it hektish or was it not hektish? So Tashmad Amr Chibar Avin Hava Uvda Beirav Chizda. We once had a situation like this by Rav Chizda, Rav Huna, and Rav Chizda. Then they had to go ask, and he asked Rav Huna, who pashta mehada Amr of Nachman, and they were posted to Shaila with something that Rav Nachman once said, and he said, "Kol mamash in yachal otzio b'dayanim haktesho eino kadosh." That the halacha is that a person can't prove his case in court. He doesn't have the ability to prove his case in court. He can't make something hektish. So it's one thing if he had the upper hand in court. So then maybe even if he didn't have he wasn't a muhsik right now because the thing was still kind of working through the court system. But so long as he had the upper hand, maybe he can be makdish. But in this case of the Masusa, the Merchats, where neither one of them really seemed to have any sort of any sort of advantage one way or another, it wouldn't be hektish. And really these rabbis maybe didn't need to be concerned. But again, the inference from this halacha is that the Gemara says, let's say a person really did have a raya. He really had, some sort of, even though right now he wasn't a muhsik, right now they're still fighting about it in court, but he had the upper hand, hektesho kadosh. Had he been makdish this merchatz, then it would have been hektish. Even though right now he doesn't necessarily have possession of this thing. Didn't Rabbi Yochanan say, and if you were learning the back half of Baba Kama and Maruba. This was a concept that came up a lot. Rabbi Yochanan Gazav Lonis Yaishu Abilim Shtem in Michon Lakdisho Zelafisha Ina Shalov Zelafisha Ina Vershuso. So this was a klal that Rabbi Yochanan said that when it comes to Gneva or Gzela, some guy steals something from someone else, both the rightful owner and the Goslin, neither one can be makdish the item. The Ganav can't because he doesn't own the thing. And even the rightful owner who does own the thing, the item is not in his possession. If it's not in his possession, he doesn't have the ability to make it hektish. What about this thing that Rav Yochanan just said? Rav Nachman, sorry. That Rav Nachman just said, that so long as I have the upper hand in Bezdin, I can always be makdish. Clearly, the rightful owner has the upper hand in Bezdin. I don't have the item right now. The Ganav has it, but I can take him to court and I can get the item back, right? I have maybe witnesses that say that it's mine. So why shouldn't I be able to be makdish, notwithstanding the fact that it's not in my rishus? So the Gemara says, "Mi savris from Mesusa metaltalin askinon." You're right. That halacha of Rav Yochanan is dealing with metaltalin when the Ganav has something in his house. This merchatz isn't metaltalin, right? It's not like a bathtub, right? That you can move. It's Mesusa Mikarkayas. We're dealing with it's a mikvah, it's a building, right? And therefore, the kiyacholotzia b'dayanim b'shustei kaima. So long as you have the upper hand in Bezdin, it's always kind of in your rishus, right? It's the whole din of Rav Yochanan that Gezel v'nasayshu abaylim is predicated on the fact. It's predicated on the fact that this item is not in your rishus right now. It's in the Goslin's rishus. But this Mesusa is not in the Goslin's rishus. This Mesusa is in the rightful owner's rishus. It's karka. Karka is in an exelas. So, okay. Tani bar Rav, Tachliva bar Marava, he made Ravavo. He learned the following halacha, right? Shnayim adukim b'talas. Two people are holding on to a talis. For whatever reason, even though our Mishnah used the term ochlin, we'll see in today's Gemara, adukim is, for our purposes, synonymous with ochlin. So you have two people holding on to a talis. Zed, the halacha is as follows. Zed notal ad makom she'ad magas. This one takes whatever he's holding on to. V'zed notal ad makom she'ad magas. V'ashar cholkim b'shaveh. So this one grabs, they're each grabbing a talis. This one keeps what he was grabbing. That one keeps what he was grabbing. And whatever's in the middle, they split b'shaveh. Now this obviously doesn't fit with our Mishnah for two reasons. Our Mishnah said that A, they each swear. This said nothing about a shul. And B, our Mishnah said they just split it down the middle. This one says they don't split it down the middle. Each one takes what they were grabbing, and then you split the rest. So first of all, machmila ravo ubishur. First of all, it's definitely got to be with a shul. He showed him, maybe pointed up to Shemayim, something like that. Clearly there's a shul. But we still have another issue. Our Mishnah said cholkim b'shaveh. This Mishnah seems to say everyone takes what they were holding on to. The Gemara says, "Ela masnisi nektani depalgi b'hadadi ve'lo ktani zenotal hashem yado zenota ad makom she'ado magas hechem mishkach." How do you kind of align our Mishnah with this halacha? So Amar Papa titfisi biker kashna. You're right. You're going to have to make a major ukimta in our Mishnah that really the halacha is that each person gets what they were grabbing. But what was our Mishnah saying? Why in our Mishnah is it cholkim b'shaveh? Our Mishnah is a case where both guys were kind of holding on to the fringes of either side of the talus. So neither one had a great hold on the talus. So 99% of the talus no one was holding on to, or 98%. 1%, this guy had this edge, this guy had this edge, and therefore they're cholkim b'shaveh. But in a chanami, if they were each holding on to the talus, they would get the portion of the talus that they were each grabbing on to. So Amar of Misharshe, or of Misharshe, said based on this, Shema Minah, if you're telling me that as long as I'm holding on to a talus, I am like, I have an upper hand, I'm a muchzik on that part that I'm holding on to. Hi, Sudra, when it comes to the case of a Kinyan Sudr, right, cave in the toughest base, Shalosh, Karinan Bay, Vinasan, Lere Ehu, the command pasuk Dami Ve Kani. So nowadays we're not that familiar with Kinyan Sudrs, maybe when you like sell your chametz, but in the olden days, right, this was a much more common form of Kinyan. So I want to be machna something to Alan, right? And maybe Alan doesn't have the money or whatever it is, right? But we still want to affect this Kinyan. So Alan will give me a sudr by me as the seller, by me holding on to the sudr, that affects this Kinyan in a certain way. And therefore the item rightfully belongs to Alan. Owes me money. All right, we'll deal with that later. But the point is, he is now the rightful owner. This is known as Kinyan Sudr. We learn it from the Sukkim in Rus, right? The pasuk says the Nasan, Shalaf Ish Nalav and Nasan L'Reyehu, and he says from the fact it's the same idea. Once the Alan, in our example, once he's holding on to shalosh etzbos, he just needs to have a good hold on the suitor. That is sufficient to affect this kinyan. Notwithstanding the fact that maybe Alan's the one giving me the suitor. Notwithstanding the fact that once I get 3 exposed on the suitor, that affects the kinyan. Notwithstanding the fact that Alan is holding on to 95% of the suitor. I'm just get a hold of it. That's all it takes to affect this kinyan. The Gemara says that that's true, that all it takes, even though Alan is really holding on to the suitor, and I'm just holding on to a small amount of it, that can still affect this kinyan. My shna, right? And what are we learning it for? V'nasan the re'eu, he just has to give it over. So my shna b'Rav Chizda, the Amar Rav Chizda get biyado u'meshicha biyado. In a case of a get, where again the pasuk says v'nasan biyado, right? Same language. In a case of a get, where let's say I would give a woman a get with, literally strings attached. So she's holding on to the get, but I have the ability to pull it away from her, right? In that situation, in Yachol and Natkol, of it's slow, Einu Meguresha. What's the difference in a case of a stuzer where I'm only holding on to a small piece of it and Alan can pull it away from me? That still affects the kinyan. So how come by a get, we say the same thing, same pasuk, that doesn't work? If I give a get to a woman, but I'm able to pull it away from her, even if she holds on to the get, and she has shalosh etzbos onto the get, that doesn't work. So what's the difference between the kinyan suitor and the case of the get? The Gemara says, what's even the question, right? Hasam creases be'inan v'leka. You're right. The word v'nasan is in both. But by a get, there's a whole other parsha of creases, right? Hacha nasina be'inan v'yi'ika. So in the case of a kinyan suitor, the pasuk says you need a nasina. You have a nasina. When it comes to a get, it's more than just a nasina. You need to get creases. So it's not enough that she just holds onto a piece of it. She needs to hold the get. And that's why there's a difference between a get and a kinyan suitor. And now we're going to move in really from here almost to the rest of the daf. If you recall, the very first day of Bava Metzia, Eddie Stopek asked, do we literally split the talus in half, or do we split the animal in half, or do we figure it out monetarily? And that's really going to be the rest of the daf. So Amar Rava, Imhaisa talus was heves, right? I may have jumped the gun a little bit. If this talus was gold, like it has some sort of golden strip or something like that, okay, we still split it down the middle. Or it says pshita. Why should it make a difference how valuable the talus was? The halacha is. You've seen this before. So because the gold happened to be in the middle. Okay, so what's in the middle? So still split it equally. Because like as Alan said, we opened the daf. Now we didn't open the daf, but one of the first things we talked about was people tend to hang on to the part of the talus that they're holding on to. So what if I'm holding on to 60%, you're holding on to 20%, and the gold somewhere in the middle, but it's closer to my 60% than your 20%, something along those lines. So I would just name it the Amrle Plog Hachi. One guy has the upper hand, and he can say, listen, I know that we'll split it half and half, but it's much closer to what I'm holding, so I should keep the golden strip. We split it away. Whatever you're holding on to, that you keep. But whatever's in the middle that no one's holding on to, that we split 50-50. And therefore, you don't have the upper hand because the part that you're holding on to is closer to the valuable strip here in the talus.
As long as holding the strip, you get the strip.
Yeah.
Well, our Mishnah seems to say you split it. Yeah,
because again, the ukita that we made in our Mishnah is that each guy is holding on to like just the edges. But it's true. If one person was holding the valuable part and the other person, and by the way, we'll see that come up in a sugya that we're about to see, a fairly complicated sugya, so fasten your seatbelts, but we'll get through it. But you'll see, it really much depends. If you're holding on a valuable part of, in the case of the Gemara, is going to be the star, you get to keep that part of the star. Okay. Tana Rabbanan. Shnayim adukin b'shtar. If you have two different people that are holding on to a star, I scared them off. It was not that bad. Yeah. So Shnayim adukin b'shtar. You have two people that are hanging on to a star. Malva Omer Shalihu v'nafal mimeni. So the Malva, the lender, is saying, that's my star. Clearly, I'm supposed to hang on to it. I dropped it. I'm sorry, but it's my star. Give it back to me, right? Nafal mimeni mitzasa. Below Omer. Now this is the borrower. He's saying, absolutely not. Shalchahu, I acknowledge this was a valid star, right? Uparati, but I paid it back, right? And Parati, I paid it back. Now it's in my possession, and I'm the one that dropped it. So again, the Malav is saying, give it back to me so I can collect it. The Lov is saying, you already collected it. Give it back to me so I can shred it. The halacha is Yiskayim Hashtar Bechosmav Divrei Rebbe. Rebbe says you have to do Mekayim the star, you have to do Kim Shtaros, and once you do that, you kind of give it back to the Malva and let him collect the star. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Yachloku. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, you split the star and you split it, right? So again, he doesn't really toss to like either side. He basically says, like almost like our Mishnah, we don't really know what to do. You have two people hanging on to it, so Yachloku. Nafaliyah dying. Let's say instead of either the Lova or the Malva walking into court, but Rabbi Reese walks into court and he's the one he's the star on the floor, and Rabbi Reese walks in. So then lo yotziu olamis. That's we don't really know what to do if Rabbi Reese walks in with it. Rabbi Yossi Omer harei b'chazkaso. The fact that is Rabbi Reese doesn't really matter. You still give it back to the Malva. And again, we'll see what all this means and why Rabbi Reese is such a pivotal force in this Gemara. So Amar Amar, let's go back to the first case of the Mishnah of this brisa, which was a Malva and a Lova, right? They're the ones that are walking into Bezdin with the star. One of the two of them found the star on the street, and we're not sure. Is it the Malvez, and therefore he should really collect it? He, was in his house, he just dropped it, he lost it, but it was never collected. Or is it the Lova who's saying, listen, I paid back my loan, and now I dropped it, whatever it is, you should give it back to me so I can shred it. And the first Manda Amar said, you give it back to the Malva, you just have to be Mekayim the star. And the other one said, Yachloku. Okay, so Amar, Iskayim Ashtar Bechosimov, you have to do Kiyim stars. So the Gemara says, so then Begavi Le Malva Kule. So once you're Mekayim the star, you just give it right back to the Malva. But Leslie Masnis and Shnayim Oksin. What about our Mishnah that says that when two people are holding on to something, you have to split it? So why did we? I hear maybe you have to be Mekayim the star or whatever it is, but why are you just giving it back to the Malva? Why don't you just now split it? So Amar Rava, Amar Rav Nachman. No. You're missing the point here. The Makuyim Divrei Kol Yachlok. We had a star that everyone agreed it had a henpick, right? If everyone agreed this was a star that was Makuyim in Bezdin already, then for sure Yachloku. Then it's the halacha of our Mishnah. Two people walk in to Bezdin holding on to something. Yachloku. The entire machlokas over here is B'she'eno Makuyim. When the star is not Makuyim on its own. So again, something that we'll kind of see a little bit on Amud Beis. When you have a star, there's a few different ways you can be Mekayim the star. On the one hand, you could have the Adim come into Bezdin and say, I signed on to this star, and then you're Mekayim the star. The other way of doing it is where Bezdin, even when they prepared the star, they saw the Adim, they were whatever, and they put a seal on the star that said, this is a good star. We were already Mekayim it in Bezdin. So they're basically, the way Rav is explaining this Bryce is as follows. If this is a star that already had this henpick, it was already Mekoyim, then we just were Cholkim B'Shavat, the Malva gets half, the Lova has to give him half, and that's it. That's just like our Mishnah. But Rebbe, why does Rebbe say it this way? Because Savar Moda B'Shar Shakasbu Tzarech L'Kaimo. Because he's saying now, standing the fact that the Lova is acknowledging this is a proper star, we still need to do Kiyim stars. So therefore, if the Malva is able to be Mekayim the star, Palik, then he's able to take half. But if he's not able to be Mekayim the star, and the star hasn't been independently verified, Lo Palik, he doesn't get anything. My timer, because Chasva Ba'almahu, because this star without independent verification is just Chasva Ba'alma, just a piece of paper. Man Kamash V'lalai star. Who's the one that's giving any credence, any value to the star? It's the Lova who's acknowledging that it was a good star. But Hakamar the Pariya. But you have like a Pesha Asr, Pesha Hitter. The Lova who's telling you that this was a valid star, he's also saying that he paid it up. Therefore, if you can independently verify that this was a good star, now you're in the parsha of our Mishnah, and we can say Yachloku. But if you're unable to even verify that this is a star, then we give the Lova the upper hand, and therefore you get nothing. Rav Shimon Gamliel Savar, he just argues. He says, no moda b'shar shakasu ain't sarach l'kaimo. He says over here the Lova is basically telling you it's a good star. Therefore, I don't need independent verification. I hold that we are already in the Mishnah. You don't even need the independent verification. And therefore, what we thought was a major machlokas is not really such a machlokas. Everyone is agreeing to the Mishnah's halacha of Yachloku. The only question is, does this star that we found on the street that doesn't have independent verification, it doesn't have a henpick, do we make the Malva go and verify this with Adam or not? The first Manda Amar says yes, and therefore until he does that, he gets nothing. Once he does that, then it's Yachloku. The second Manda Amar said, no, we don't even make him do that. It's Yachloku right now. So then we had the Seifa of the Mishnah. Nafali Adayin, if Rabbi Reese walks into Bezdin and he's holding on to the star between the Malva and the Lova, so the first halacha was lo yotziu olamis, right? It's yehemuna chashev eliyo, and the second one was you give it back to the Malva. The Gemara says, "My shna liad dayan." Like, what does our Reese have to do with any of this? Like, well, it has to be the dayan walks in. What if it was just me? So Amar Rava, he says again, lav it doesn't have to be a Reis. This is all the Bryce is trying to say. The Acher Shamatza Star Shnafel Yadayin, even if Levi Khan finds the star. But the point is, this was already a star that had fallen into the hands of the Dayan. It's a star that was verified by the CRC. I mean, what does that mean? Because of Behenpik. That's all he's trying to say. Even if it doesn't have to be Rabbi Reese, the point is, if any one of us finds a star, but it was a star that had validation from the Bezdin, i.e., it had independent verification, it had this henpick, then lo yotziyu olamas. Then it's still Yehimun Chad Sheva Eliyo. And again, what the Bryce is really trying to say is, notwithstanding the fact that it has verification, meaning the Lomabaya, low cost of the handpick. Clearly, if the star wasn't verified, the equal remember cost of Lova is below lava. And you could even say that this was never even a good star, meaning maybe they wrote the star with the intention of entering into this loan, but they never even entered into this loan. But what the Bryce is trying to say is a chiddush that even if we have independent verification, even if we have a handpick, still lo yachzer, still we're not going to give it back to the malveh. There is in the base measures. Yeah. Still, you're not going to give it back to the malvet. Because anytime you find a star in the street, even if we know it was a good star, and at one point it was clearly a good star, it had a henpick, but we do have to assume that perhaps the malvet paid it up. The lova paid it back to the malvet, and this is really the lova's, and the lova just dropped it. And because we don't really know whose it is, you say, obviously, if one of the two sides can bring, Adam or something like that, then that's one thing. But until that happens, we just say we're not going to side with either one. Rabbi Yossi, he argued, Rabbi Yossi Omer, we do give it back to the malveh, below chayshin on lip hiron. Because Rabbi Yossi's view, which is probably the one that makes a little bit more sense, right, it's easier to understand, is no, if we just find a star, we should probably assume it belongs to the malva. Why would you assume it belongs to the malva as opposed to the lova? Because the malva's got to hang on to his star. He doesn't really have a choice. He needs the star to be able to collect on his loan, right? So it makes sense. I mean, he was careless, and that's not great, but it makes sense why he kept it around. From the lova's perspective, why are you keeping around a star? Once you paid it back, you should shred it immediately. So from the fact that we're finding a star in the street, it makes sense that it would belong to the malva, and that's really what Rav Yosef is saying. He's not choshesh. Sorry, he's not choshesh leperon, meaning he doesn't assume that a star on the street was already paid back, because if it was already paid back, the lova should have shredded it. So he makes sense that if you find a star on the street, it really belongs to the lender. But the Gemara says, "Below chayish Rabbi Yossi lepiron." Is it really true that Rabbi Yossi is not chayish lepiron, and he always says, "Give it back to the malveh"? I have a question from a different brisa. This says matzah star ksuba v'shuk. Let's say you find a ksuba in the street. Now a ksuba is kind of similar to a loan, right? The husband owes the wife money, so you just found a ksuba in the shuk. The husband saying, "I already paid the wife, and therefore it's mine." The wife is saying, "I never got paid, and therefore it's mine." So bisman shabal modeh yachzer lisha. If the baal, if they're happily married, and the baal is saying, "Listen, I don't know why my wife lost it. She's a little careless, but I never paid her." So of course you give it back to the isha. It ain't habal modeh, but if the baal is not modeh, lo yachzer lo lezev lo lezev. Then it's like the Tanakam in the previous Mishnah. We don't know what to do with it. We're not going to give it back to the wife. We're not going to give it to the husband. We don't know what to do with it. Rabbi Yossi Omer, he disagrees. He says, if they're still happily married, you give it back to the Isha. That fits very well with what Rabbi Yossi said prior. You always give it back to the Malveh because in all likelihood, it was really hers. But in Armala, Onis Garsha, in a situation where she was divorced or she was widowed, lo yachzer lo lezev lo lezev. And this doesn't fit with the Rabbi Yossi, because what he's saying is, to the extent that she was divorced or widowed, then we're not really sure if the husband paid it up or the Yarshim paid it up, or if it's really hers. According to Rabbi Yossi, he should say, I don't care what happened. We always should assume it belongs to the Malveh, or in this case, the wife, because had it been paid back, the husband should have shredded the ksuba. Right? So how do we reconcile the Rabbi Yossi in the prior brisa, who said we always assume it belongs to the Malveh, with the Rabbi Yossi in this brisa, who doesn't just automatically assume it belongs to the wife? Here he's not so sure. So the Gemara says, Epuch. No, I'll tell you what we do. We just flip around Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan, and now it could all make sense. Nafal yad dayin, if we had a henpek lo yitziu olam esiv Rabbi Yossi. It's really Rabbi Yossi who says, because he is choshesh that the thing may have been paid up. But the Chachamim say, no. We always assume it belongs to the Mal. The problem is, if you're holding on to the cheshbon of the Gemara, we didn't really answer anything, because in the case of what the Gemara is about to ask, in the case of the marriage case, both Manda Amrim, both the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi, kind of said there are cases where it's the Hemunah Chachiyava Eliyahu. You don't necessarily automatically give it to the wife. So the fact that we flipped around the first price and say, okay, so Rabbi Yossi is going to hold, he is Chayish Lepiron, he is going to say Hemunah Chachiyava Eliyahu. We still are going to have a stira with the Rabbanan. All you did was change who the stira is with. So the Rabbanan says, Yachi Kacha Rabbanan, not a Rabbanan. You haven't actually answered the question. Fine, you answered up for Rabbi Yossi, but we still have a problem with the Rabbanan. So the Gemara says, no, you're right. We're going to do two things, two different maneuvers. We're going to be Epoch, the first brisa, so we're going to say that Rabbi Yossi is Chayish Lepiron. And in the second brisa, we're just going to make some edits, a little Chsura Mechsra, V'hachik Tani. We'll just edit out the Rabbanan entirely, and we can make this all work. So the Gemara says, Shtar, Tuba, Hula Rabbi Yossi. Really, I'll tell you that we were Epoch, the first brisa, so Rabbi Yossi is Chayish Lepiron. And we're going to change the second brisa to just edit out the Rabbanan. This is how we're going to read that second brisa. Ein habal modeh. If the Baal is saying, I paid her already, so lo yachzer lo lezeh lo lezeh, then we're not going to give it to her. And this will fit with Rabbi Yossi. In a situation where she was already married, she was still married, yachzer le isha amar Yossi, Rabbi Yossi, Omer, Ozechas Baila, Yachzul Isha, this Armlo, and his Garshal, Yachzul Lezev, Lo Lezeh. So again, the way we answer up the Sira is by doing two things. We changed the Shita of Rabbi Yossi, and we edited out the Rabbanan of the second Brisa, so now everything can fit. If Papa Amar, Papa is going to give another answer. He says, the Olam Lo Table. Really, I'll tell you, you don't have to be Mapich the Brisa. But Rabbi Yossi, Ledebram the Rabbanan, Ka'amar Lu, Rabbi Yossi is just, will reread the second Brisa. Say that Rabbi Yossi is not really explaining his own shita. He is just saying lefi the shita is to the Rabbanan. So how do we read this? But at least according to you guys, odeli mihat tachas baila the yachzer the isha la bas pironi. But amrle Rabbanan, but the Rabbanan would respond to Rabbi Yossi. Amar tsarari atafsa. And that's not so true. Maybe I'll tell you that he did really pay a second one. Okay, Ravina Amar, another answer. Olam epoch kamaisa. Really, we should do the epoch of the first price. The time of the Rabbanan. So again, now we have a seer on the Rabbanan. What's the reason for the Rabbanan? Is Mishum Techashino l'shtei ksubos, because they have a different concern. They have this concern of shtei ksubos. Rabbi Yossi l'shtei ksubos lo chayish, and Rabbi Yossi is not going to be chayish for these two ksubos. So what exactly is this two ksubos? So I think we're all somewhat familiar with this halacha. What happens if you wake up one day, or your wife wakes up one day, and she realizes that she doesn't have her ksubos? This is very much halacha l'maisa, right? You got to write another one. So you got to go to the whoever it is, or by Reese, or whoever it is, or by First. Oh, so there you go. And you have a second one. So what happens now if your wife finds the first ksuba? So the husband can very well say, throw it out, right? The last thing I need is for you to have two ksubas, right? We all trust our wives, but imagine people are a little bit more cynical once upon a time. So they said, listen, I hear, meaning normally I would agree that it always goes back to the wife, right? Or it always goes back to the Balba. But in a situation like this, it's very possible we wrote her a second ksuba already. So the first ksuba that we find, shred, so that I don't have to pay her two different ksubas. But Rabbi Yossi, for whatever reason, is not chayish for that situation. Okay. Amar Rabbi Lazar, and this is, we'll kind of end. We'll get to the top of the next thing, but it's pretty easy from here on out. So Amar Rabbi Lazar, machlokas b'sheshneim adukim betofes ushneim betorah. So again, in any sort of shtar, Alan, right? You have what's known as the toref and what's known as the tofes. The tofes is the boilerplate, and the toref is the meat of the. Oh, very good. So we'll see. It's not that clear, but you have a toref and you have a tofes. So Rabbi Lazar says like this: the machlokas of when we say yachloku is b'shneim adukim betofes, they're each holding on to the boilerplate, or b'shneim betoref, or they're reaching on to the toref. Aval echad aduk betofes, the echad aduk betoref. Let's say one of them is holding on to the valuable part of the star, and the other guy is holding on to the less valuable part of the star. Zenotel tofes, zenotel toref, and this is exactly, if you recall, we were talking about earlier with the golden talus, or whatever it is. Whichever part you are holding on to, that's the part that you're going to keep. Rav Yochanan Amar lo olam cholkin afilu echad aduk betofes echad aduk betoref. No, mechadesi. Whichever, doesn't matter what part of the talus you're holding to. We split the whole thing equally. Vatanya Zenot al Makom Sheyad Magath. How does Rabbi Yochanan learn that other brisa? We had a pretty clear brisa that said that you take what you're holding onto. So he says, Lo tzricha dekai toref be mitzai. No, he's saying, I was just saying, you're right. That's a situation where I'm just talking about a situation where the toref is in the middle. But Rabbi Yochanan really agrees with the premise that to the extent that one side was more valuable than the other, and each guy was holding one side, they would each take what they were holding on to. So I mean, what's Rabbi Yochanan coming to teach us? It's exactly what we talked about earlier in the top with like the golden talus. It's the same idea that even though neither one of them are holding on to the Torah, it's in the middle, but you still split it equally. You would have a havamina, the one who's closer to the Torah, and say, listen, I get that we have to split it, but clearly the part that I'm holding on to is much closer to the Torah, so I should get the Torah. That's not the way we split it. You get what you're holding on to, but everything else we're going to split down the middle, even if the thing is closer to you. So what we're basically saying is one guy's holding the Torah, one guy's holding the tofes, i.e., one guy's got the valuable part of the ksuba, the star. The other one's got the less valuable part of the star, and we split it. This guy gets the valuable part, that guy gets the least valuable part. So Amalei Rav Achmad Diftu Ravina. The Rebbe Lazar, the Amar Zenot Tofes Zenot Torah. What does a person even want the boilerplate for? These guys are walking in a bezdin. Clearly, they want to split a valuable thing. What does one guy want a piece of paper for? He needs a bottle stopper. That's what the Gemara, sometimes the Lashon the Gemara uses, right? What does he need this thing for? What are we even talking about? So Amar Lay said, no. Lid May. Basically, of the what? The value of the paper? No, not really. So what he's saying is like this. We were kind of building this up to say that the Torah has all the value, that has all the details, that has the Levi owes Alan the money and the date and this and that. And the Tofes is all the boilerplate stuff that goes in every contract, right. 10 pages of legalese of the boilerplate. But he's saying that's not really true. Even in the Tofes, we still have a lot of the details, and the Tofes itself is also pretty valuable. But there's one, we'll just say it outside and then we'll read it inside. There's one major difference between the Torah and the Tofes, and that is the Torah includes the date. So it says that, Alan lent Levi money on March 6th. Why is that relevant? It's relevant because to the extent you want to collect, and I don't have the money anymore, but I sold properties off following March 6th, you can now go to those buyers and collect it. If there wasn't a date in the star, you can collect from me, but that's all you got. Once I don't have anything. So the point is there's a valuable difference between the Torah and the Tofes. It's not 100 to 0 like we were assuming originally. It's there's right, it's closer in value. But the point is that if I'm holding the Tofes and you're holding the Torah, so the person holding the Torah doesn't get to collect 100% of the loan, but he gets to collect that difference in value between what the Torah was and what the Tofes is, and let's just read it inside. So Amar Leila Demei, the Amar Hachi Shtara the Isbe Izman Kamashav. We say a star that includes the Zman, how much is that worth? With a less Bezman Kamashavi, and a star that doesn't have the Zman, how much is that worth? So a star the Isbe Izman, a star that has a Zman Gavi Mishavi, it has the ability to collect from the Chasim Mishubadin, like we just explained. The Idach, but the other one, Lo Gavi Mishavdi, the Yaivle Ha'ech, the Beni Beni. So you have to determine what that value is, and that is what we force the Lovet to now pay, or whichever one's holding that part of the star, that's what we force that guy to pay. Okay, and that's how they split it up. Oh, sorry. And now that we're saying this chiddush, when we talk about splitting the star, it's also Lidvei. That's always what we're talking about. We're always talking about splitting up the value and saying that we kind of focus what's the difference in value of what the two are holding, and that's kind of what they split. If you don't say it like this and you literally say that you cut the star right down the middle, if two people are holding on to a talus, you literally cut the talus in half, right? Right? All you're doing is ruining a talus. I mean, how is that helping anybody? The Gemara says that's not really such a right, because maybe I'll tell you that we can cut it in a way, maybe there are tailors, they can still cut it in a way where it would be useful for smaller people, right? Useful for a katanim. So it's not like ruining a talit. It's not going to be able to be used in the way it was used before, but at least it's chazi for katanim. If you have a golden talus or a talus with a golden strip, Tolkien, we split it. Hachanami the palgala, you literally cut it in half. Haf to dua, you're going to ruin the value. And the assumption here is you're not going to give a golden talith to kids. right? So what are you going to do with this? It is okay for wealthier kids. You're right. You're not going to give a golden talus to any kid, but a b'nei malachim, maybe they do wear a golden talus. So therefore, again, you're not totally ruining the value. This was Eddie's kash on day one. If two people will hold, this was the end of our Mishnah, right? Two people riding on an animal. You literally cut the animal in half. What are you gonna? What does anyone need a half an animal for? Bishlama tahora. Now, Bishlam, if you're going to tell me that this animal was a cow, so maybe you do shecht it, and then you split the meat. Ella tamea, but if it's a chamor, like what are you going to do with half a donkey, right? Hafsadua. Ella lidimei nachanam lidimei. So it's muchach that clearly what we're talking about is we take the value of the donkey, and that's what we split. Kamash Malan, that is what we do with all of these cases. We look at the value and then we split it down.